Hi everyone, welcome to our first episode of Seriously Science. In this podcast series we're going to try to discuss various topics in science, dealing with different topics and trying to simplify it and bridge the gap between science and just the general public, helping people to understand science, you know. So yeah, well, we're a group of how many of us? Four young individuals, four scientists. We will introduce ourselves and starting with myself. I am Tevin Butler. I'm a recent graduate with a BSc in biology with specialization in marine biology, ecology, and environmental biology. It is long, I know. My passion is to do with conservation, obviously marine life, and also ecology. And I love conversation, so this is a great opportunity for me to have a conversation with some great young people, like-minded individuals. I will now pass the mic over to Neeta.
Okay, thanks, Tevin. Great job. Hi, I'm Neeta Udet. When I was a research assistant, that kind of led me into the SciComm route of things, where I was like, the public clearly does not understand something. So if I could help that with the knowledge that I have as a recent graduate, why not do it? So I have a BSc in biochemistry and biology. It was a double major. And then I worked as a research assistant at UWI for a year and a half. And now I'm a demonstrator there as well. I'm a content creator at Ages of Science. So yeah, that's me. Anna.
Okay, hi, I'm Anastasia Vasquez. I also have a BSc in biochemistry and biology. For me, it's a little different. I got experience in forensic biology, and right now I work in epidemiology. Before I liked genetics, but I'm pushing more towards the public health side because I guess I realized like the need for public health in the community, where it's not just telling people the figures that's happening for different diseases, but just trying to allow them to understand what is going on, why certain things are needed. Because you see, especially for COVID-19, you see so many people sharing different things about why you shouldn't take the vaccine or about like the symptoms you have to look out for. And then some people don't really know. So I think that's why I'm more interested in doing this to share that with the public, and it builds on my field of epidemiology. And also I'm a content creator at Aegis of Science. I'm passing on to Darrian.
Hi everyone, so I'm Darrian Paul. I'm a proud trainee. I did my bachelor's degree in biotechnology at University College London, and I am currently a PhD candidate in biological sciences at the University of Bristol. My current project looks at developing standardized secretion systems in microalgae. I'm very interested in science communication and science in general, and I would like to, my aim is to start up a biotech company in Trinidad. And so to keep doing that and to work towards that goal, I think it's very important to help develop the conversation around biotechnology and science as a whole, because I think that as a country and as a region, we are a very rich biodiverse area. And I think that it would be amazing if we can get the general public involved in this scientific endeavor. And I hope that we will encourage some of you to come along the ride with us. Thanks for joining us.
Can I just jump in really quickly? So as you said, we have a lot of biodiversity in the country that we could be taking better advantage of. I would just like to plug our journal club that will be tentatively the 12th of February in microbiology. And his project was titled The Discovery and Development of Novel Antimicrobial Compounds Produced by Pseudomonas aeruginosa UE1. If you come to the journal club, he'll be talking a little bit more about that and the general biodiversity that we have and what kind of opportunities we have for development with the microbes and plants in Trinidad and Tobago and so on.
All right, so I guess we could introduce today's topic, which is the need for science communication, where we're basically going to discuss the gap between science research and the public.
We can start by defining what is science communication.
Mhm.
So in a Catalyst article in 2013, Dr. Emily Dawson, a lecturer at King's College in London University, she stated that science communication is about building a bridge between the general public and people working in scientific research. So most people know up to science in an academic bubble. So like when you might know science in school, and then when you leave school, unless you join like a particular field in science, you may not be as exposed to science. So it's just about building that bridge between people who aren't exposed to science and people who are in the research itself.
Just to jump on that point, it's interesting that you said that people aren't exposed to science, but the truth is we are all exposed to science like all the time. It's just we aren't always aware that we're exposed to science, you know? So I think the important thing about science communication is that it is communicated in a way that everyone understands and doesn't feel like intimidated to like approach.
Yeah.
Completely
Yeah.
agree with that. I think the best science communication is the way that you don't think you are necessarily interacting with science communication at all. It just seems like just general public information, and that's probably the best way that it should be. Like you don't think about when you're going to try and fix your phone or download an app as tech communication or some kind of very high level thing, but that's how it is. That's how it should be. It should be so accessible that you can just look up a YouTube video, you can read a quick article, and you can understand what it is. So science communication is literally just that. It's bridging the gap between the elitism that the public has in their head of what science is and the communication in everyday language about how science should be.
Okay.
I didn't hear, I just heard kick it off with that, so I'll just jump in.
Yeah, we're just gonna kick it off. Yeah.
Thanks, Tevin.
You're welcome. Right. So a lot of the breakdown between the public and science and communication, the reason there's a gap is because, well, a lot of scientists, usually scientists would be the one to communicate their findings to the public, right? And they would write papers, they would write, well, first of all, papers aren't always easily accessible to everyone, unless you're in an institute that deals with research or part of a university, or you just want to pay money to read publications, which the general person, the average man, isn't going to spend his money to read publications, like if it's Netflix or something, you know? But one of the issues is that scientists tend to feel, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I feel like they tend to fail to understand their target audience, and therefore they speak on the topic as if they're speaking to one of their colleagues using jargon and statistics that the average person might not quite grasp, like by just hearing it or by just reading it. And sometimes that kind of intimidates persons to like read, especially if you're not competent, or you don't feel like if you're competent to like understand these big topics. Seeing words that you don't understand, or seeing like numbers that with all sorts of science kind of intimidates people to like interact with it, or even try to read and be like, hey, maybe I understand this. Seeing those things kind of would be like intimidating them, and they would just leave it to like, okay, this is what the scientists say, and that's what they say. And then they'll probably rely on somebody else's opinion on what the scientist says, if they feel like if it's making sense to them, and then try to like accept that as their real understanding of a topic.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because what I wanted to add on to that as well is that I would like to make the blanket statement that scientists don't know who their target audience is. I want to say that because a lot of the times when they talk about it, like they don't know how to translate saying something as simple as like 10.7 times 10.10 fold or something like that, like just to say that it's 10.7 times more than that. They would try to kind of make it a little bit more complicated than it should be. And then that comes in. Another issue is that while the scientists don't understand the target audience, the media does. And so the media uses that to their advantage. So they'll do like these kind of clickbaity titles. Like recently, the vaccination, like the drive started for COVID-19. And I saw an article that had like the worst headline ever, where it was like, a nurse got COVID-19, tested positive for COVID-19 6 days after getting the vaccine.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, and I was so irritated with it because it's such a clickbaity thing. People obviously aren't going to understand that correlation is not causation and vice versa, right? So they'll think that the vaccine gave them COVID-19, so now that the nurse tested positive for that reason, without realizing that they could have been exposed to the virus prior to getting the vaccine. Also, the vaccine doesn't prevent infection, it prevents disease. Like that's the goal of the vaccine, to prevent symptoms of COVID-19, not necessarily to prevent the virus from being able to infect somebody. So the media kind of preys on that, on the
because
public not
they
being
want
knowledgeable.
The viewers,
yeah.
They want viewers, so they're not gonna think about
so they understand
educating
their target
the public.
audience. Yeah. And then the other thing as well is like when you have like these sites that promote like holistic healing or whatever, they take things that, like superfoods, for example, they might say this blueberry is a superfood because it has this particular compound in it. And then when you look at the amount of the compound that is present in the superfood, it's not going to have any actual effect. But because of how they presented the information on their website or in their WhatsApp message or whatever the case may be, they actually reach a wider audience because they're able to say, well, blueberries has this that prevents development of cancer, and that's it. Whereas the actual journal article that might be linking that relation, like to a small degree, might not be as clearly stated as that. So I think the media has kind of a big part. I mean, scientists obviously should do better to communicate better, but I think the media has a big part to play in it as well.
I completely agree.
Yeah, that goes to one of my points too, that not all scientists can be science communicators. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that, first of all, scientific literacy is a skill. It's not something that you automatically have. Just because the information is there doesn't mean that everybody is going to be able to digest it. For example, in my first year of undergrad, we spent our first year learning how to read papers, right? And if you're just coming out and just publishing in scientific jargon in the middle of a pandemic, people who don't have that scientific literacy won't be able to break down the information that they're given. And similar to Neeta said, they will rely on the mass media to do that job for them. When the people who are doing that and breaking down information, they don't have the scientific literacy skills either. So they are inferring from the kind of clickbait things. They just skim a paper and think about how they can get the most clicks, like Hannah said. And I completely agree that not all scientists are communicators. It's two separate jobs. Like, for example, in my university, to become a lecturer, to become a researcher, you had to lecture, you had to teach, which is not, I don't think, a great system, because it means that everybody who's doing research teaches, but not everybody who does research is a good teacher. And that's quite obvious. And so they're two different skills. It's unique that you find somebody who has both skill sets. And I think that's quite important to recognize that not everybody who's a great scientist is a great communicator or a good teacher. There are a few people who can do both.
Yeah. And most people, they may be experts in their field, but it might be so narrow because science is so broad. You have it's like a tree with different branches. There's so many different fields in science. And if they don't take time to consult with other fields, so like, let's say a chemist commenting on the vaccine, if they don't take time to consult with a virologist or an epidemiologist, then whatever they're saying is just based on their field, and they're not looking into the bigger picture to actually educate the public. They're just talking about what they know. And I think that kind of what holds back the public in science, because they're just elaborating what they know. So it shows this elite thing in science where people kind of stand back from like, oh, I don't know science, so I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to take part in this because I don't understand what they're saying. And yeah, so.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point that you brought up. I think that's something that actually kind of brings down the elitism of science compared to a few other fields. For example, like if a politician doesn't know something, they will still go very gung-ho on it and say, yes, this is what I believe. Whereas as a scientist, if you don't know something, it's okay to say you don't know, because one person can't know everything. As a scientist, you go very deep into one singular field, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have a broad knowledge of everything outside of that field. And so it's very important to consolidate information alongside others. And that's why there's a lot of changing advice and stuff that's going on for this pandemic, because science is not something that is gospel. There's not just one right answer. It is a combination of theories and ideas, and from that, new ideas are born. And so it's necessary to have these conversations and communication. This is why science communication is so important, because no man is an island. There's no one right answer in science. It's always a mix of different communication.
You're dropping in poetry and things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am. For really,
yeah,
Snaps.
But yeah, I agree with everything that you all said, and I had a point and I forgot it. Maybe I'll
write it down, Neeta. Write it down.
It's true. I do have a pen for that reason. I forgot.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. So another point I want to raise is the fact that well, I don't know. I've been doing some reading, and I'm seeing like a lot of people well, I don't want to say complaining, but they bring up the point that there's a lot of bad science going around just because scientists want to be published. So they are basically doing poor science, publishing their results, and basically to publish, to be recognized, to to further their careers, and what that is leading to is a lot of different varying opinions that could sometimes be very confusing when, especially with regards to what Neeta was saying with reporters, and the 1 week they would report, one popular thing is like oils. Coconut oil is good for you. Then 1 week it would be like, no, coconut oil, this food is bad for you. And I believe like these processes, people just doing bad science is actually affecting their communication, because when they release a paper, they're going to report on it, and when they report on it, sometimes people's main source of science could be the news or social media, and you'll see these two contrasting stories, and then you'd ask yourself, well, it can be this and this, so what is the truth? Is science, could you depend on it? Could you depend on what the scientists are saying? Which, if there's no trust in the scientific system, then they're not gonna really take anything seriously, and well, that would definitely lead to a breakdown in the communication. So I don't know if anyone like witnessed this or viewed this or is aware of this, or what's your thoughts on it?
To add to your point, sorry, Neeta.
You can go ahead. I wrote it down. No, I wrote it down. I'll remember.
To add to your point, Tevin, World Health Organization actually declared that we're fighting an infodemic alongside a pandemic. So they describe the infodemic to be a tsunami of information, some accurate and some not. And that's what's having like negative impacts on the public right now, because like you said, everybody wants to have their voice or have their word in, or have their like articles in, just to make themselves look good during this pandemic.
So some scientists are actually doing poor science from the get-go, just in order to probably they're matching the results or reporting only a certain amount of their results and keeping results that are not favorable to their thesis. And this, because the thing about science is when somebody publishes a paper and you follow their method, you should get very similar. You don't have to get the exact same thing, but very similar results, and there's an issue brewing that you can't repeat some experiments because the science is just poor. And I think is that what helps. It adds to the already science changes, and because they're doing it kind of on purpose, I think that's making the science changes worse, is like exacerbating the distrust that people would have had just because science changes. Yeah, I think that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah.
But that actually reminds me of the Wakefield and autism paper, because there were first, it was terrible. The entire thing was just terrible on the whole, because his sample size was like 12, and then he tried to apply those results to like an entire population and so on. But that was an example of bad science that, I mean, we're still kind of dealing with the repercussions of it today.
I can actually explain that in depth. Like, tell the whole Wakefield story from the beginning, because a lot of people won't really know what is the story.
Should we do it now, or should we do it in like a future episode? Because that's what I wasn't sure.
Well, give us a gist. Give us a gist in terms of like
because that was
the beginning, the middle, and the end. Don't leave out the middle bits.
Yeah, but I think it's an important story to cover because it's a monumental failure of science communication. So I think that could be an interesting case study, at least, to talk about.
Okay, well, for those of you who might not know, the Wakefield thing that I mentioned is, so Wakefield is a doctor practicing, well, no longer practicing, but he was a doctor back in 1990 something, I think. I'm not sure. His name is Dr. Andrew Wakefield, and he is basically the person that linked the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, to autism falsely. So later it turned out that he had like he was involved, was it a lawsuit he was involved in, I think?
Yeah, it was a whole lawsuit, and he ended up losing his medical license as well. So this man is no longer practicing or publishing science.
Yeah, no, but I think he was actually working, like he was in cahoots with a company that was trying to sue a pharmaceutical company, and that's why he worked to try to prove that link between the MMR vaccine and autism, so that he could get the payout from that suit as well, to, well, obviously to make money. And of course, because of that, back in the day, we still have to be dealing with anti-vaxxers today, because they still try to link and use that as like a valid argument. And then when after that paper came out, for many years, other scientists, researchers around the world have been trying to like provide that link, like prove that link, to see if it was actually true, and they have not been successful yet. So point is, all of that just to say, MMR vaccine and autism, they're not linked.
So something that you guys have kind of been alluding to is a very fundamental process in scientific research is peer review. So peer review is the process by which an unbiased third party tries to repeat the experiments or research conducted by the previous researcher to either confirm or deny the research hypothesis they have proved is correct or not. And so the reason why this is important is it shows that there is always an unbiased party present in any research that gets published. So it must be confirmed by other parties who have no interest in whether or not this research goes forward. It's just to state whether or not this research is plausible or true. So all this, there's a lot of, right now science has become a very political arena, which it shouldn't necessarily be, because those two things are quite separate. Politics is based on ideals, where science is based more on truth. It's not necessarily a belief system like that. Yes, there are arguments that can be made in science, but they must be evidence-based. It's quite a dangerous time when people are speaking about scientific facts or theories and just throwing in personal beliefs about it that have no scientific backing or evidence. And that's where the Tevin was alluding to, the poor science comes in and the lack of science. Because if you already start trying to prove points with a bias in mind, it already means that you're you're kind of going in with something to prove rather than seeing whether or not this works. Because usually in science, how you want to perform an experiment is you have a hypothesis and you go whether to see whether or not the hypothesis is true. If your hypothesis is declined, you have to state that as well. So it's important to be truthful in science. If you're coming in with a belief that yes, your hypothesis is true, and you will collect the data to confirm your bias. And science is not about confirmation bias. It's about either proving or disproving a theory and then moving on from there. And that's where all this poor science is coming in.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums up the whole conundrum that science has been having right now in terms of poor science and good science, and distinguishing between both of them, which kind of leads us into the whole misinformation versus disinformation. And so let me just give like a definition. Misinformation is false information that one spreads because they believe it's true, versus disinformation, which is false information spread intentionally to mislead people. And I believe I got that definition from Merriam-Webster. Yeah. So so we could see how both these things have been employed. Well, as we're speaking, in terms of people spreading information because that's what they think is correct. We could probably even go back to as recent as with COVID-19 in terms of people, they think that masks do not work, and which was really the fact. People actually thought that the mask wouldn't be effective, or it wouldn't make a difference. And then they had to retrack and state that no, well, masks are helpful in preventing infection. And then we could see cases of disinformation in terms of anti-vaxxers or scientists who would have done research to confirm a bias because they had other intentions in terms of having companies support their research to be able to, make that company seem profitable. One very good example of this, which I remember when I learned it, I was shocked. The old saying that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It was done by Kellogg's, the inventor of Kellogg's cereal, and he basically paid scientists to confirm or do research that proves breakfast is the most important meal of the day, just to ensure that his company would have did well and people would go out and buy breakfast cereals.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's like
Kellogg's
a real thing.
Yeah, Kellogg's have like a lot of.
I didn't know that.
You have a lot of bad stories.
No.
But essentially, that's what happened. And now look at us here, and cereal is part of an essential breakfast, right? And breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Have you all recognized it? Is it something you all think is prevalent at the moment? I don't know.
This reminds me of alkaline water.
I was thinking about that actually.
Like, sharing that alkaline water does it, and Blue Water has made this whole, profit probably from selling alkaline water.
Yeah.
And things like the keto diet and these things that people try to market as scientific, with scientific backing to prove that it's better for you, healthier for you, or this is how it should be done. And I think that's very dangerous because a lot of people buy into this because of
the poor people, like they don't know.
They buy into this, which has me with another point. So Dr. Khan, a specialist in risk perception and science communication at Yale Law School, he was saying that this readiness to agree with people in your surrounding, your social surrounding, basically people who you agree with, your social group, in terms of like religion, people of educational background or class, it might be an evolution preset for us to agree with what these people are saying, just so that we don't be left out. Because if we are left out, then it's harder to survive, you know, as a single unit in terms, except for in a group. So he's saying that, let me quote him, both to avoid dissonance and to protect their ties to others, individuals face a strong psyche pressure to confirm their perceptions of risk to those that distinguish their group from competing ones, which basically says, to use anti-vaxxers as an example, if I'm an anti-vaxxer, I believe in anti-vaxxing, I would not go against my group and say that anti-vaxxing is bad for fear of being left out of that group, because then I would then need to find a new group, and that is something that is difficult. And well, I guess he's linking this to evolution, because back when, you know, we were hunters and gatherers, you would need a group to hunt and gather, and if you get thrown out of that group, then you're out on your own trying to hunt and gather, which might be a difficult task. But what do you all think about that?
I actually
Not
had
much
that.
has changed since then.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This actually reminds me of this experiment I saw on TV. So they rang this bell and one person stood up. So they wanted to see if the rest of the people in the room would stand up every time the bell rang. So they rang it again. The person stood up, and then somebody stood up because they're confused, right? So they stood up as well. And then until like eventually they rang the bell and everybody just started standing up as they rang the bell. And it just showed you like people just follow blindly without, because everybody's doing it. So because everybody's following this, that's just our concept. Like we follow blindly into anything. So it just goes into like what Tevin was saying. That's just how, like, I don't know, like how we go. That's how society is made of.
Yeah,
I
which
guess.
shows that it could be a deep tie in
Yeah.
evolution. It's like we can't even
Yeah.
override.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even simple things like that, imagine science. They're gonna believe anything that's being shared.
Yeah.
I think actually it's worse now than ever. So what you're alluding to basically that humans have a very tribalist mindset, which is very true. You want to stick with your tribe because your tribe protects you, right? There's going to be anything from your family to a political group to a country, right? You want to have a similar mindset of those that you share space and mindset with, right? You don't want to be too individualistic from them to the point where it's seen as extreme, because then, as Tevin was saying, you would be on your own. And but it's even worse now with social media, because there are so many of these different groups which are so easily accessible that give extremist points of view, but they make it in a way that it's very easily accessible, and they will say one or two things which you might agree with, and then you're slowly brainwashed into believing the stuff that they're saying. But another problem with social media on the whole is that it helps with confirmation bias and makes it very easy for you to get stuck into an idea and surround yourself only with people who have similar thinking of you. So, for example, on Twitter, you would follow people who have a similar mindset. You might even just watch the news, which tells you the things you want to hear and demonizes the next group. For example, this is really visual in the political arena. Whereas you can easily just subscribe to one news outlet or one way of thinking and just drown out the rest. And it makes it more divided than ever. So people don't listen to reason; they just listen to these prophets that they want to hear, and they will just say what they want to hear. And the reason that's so dangerous, because science is a field that you need to have discussion from both sides. You need to be in a constant conversation, especially with opposing ideas. Because if you can't defend your idea against somebody who opposes it, your argument is weak, your defense is weak, and it doesn't mean that you're actually right. You're just surrounding yourself with yes men, and that means nothing in the grand scheme of things. Science is not something that is an individual sphere. It doesn't just affect one person. It can affect the whole world. So you need to make sure that what you're doing and what you're saying is right. So it's more important than anything to have conversations with people who disagree with you. And I think that it's important that we practice that, and we practice having discussions and debates with people who we disagree with, because it means that we'll become better scientists. We'll be able to have the conversations and arguments and come out of them being able to either realize what we've said is wrong or it's right. And it's good to know the truth moving forward, because at the end of the day, that's what science is all about.
Yeah. So I agree with that as well, but I think it's not necessarily only discussing the opposing side of things to, I guess, kind of defend your argument, but kind of to get a bit of an idea of like where they're coming from. So you could approach it with a little bit more empathy, because recently I discovered on Twitter as well, because I do threads and whatnot about the vaccines and so on. And then occasionally anti-vaxxers would come into my mentions and I would have to like deal with them and whatever. And that's when I kind of realized that there are people who are genuinely concerned. And when you look at who they are, it's mostly people who are Black, because of the history of medicine and science and how they've been treated in this field. So they have like a very valid reason to have this mistrust of science. So once you kind of approach the discussion with a bit more empathy, and you just kind of try to understand where it is they're coming from, what are their concerns, how can you help them kind of overcome this, I think it generally makes more way for them to, I guess, be more trustful of science and scientists in the future, because they have like a long, like people of color in general just have a history of not being treated very well by science and by medicine. So I think approaching the discussion to have more empathy and understand their side of the story does help as well to kind of, I guess, to help everybody at the end of the day. Because when it comes to certain things, it is like a matter of public health. It's not just us having to deal with anti-vaxxers as an individual. It's literally a matter of everybody and public health.
Exactly, I completely agree. And this is why it's important to have those discussions as well, because you need to find out where is the flaw in the science communication, right? Mm-hmm. Because if a large portion of the population has this misinterpretation of the research, the fact that is out there, it's important to break that down and realize what needs to be restructured and reset in a way that it makes it more digestible to the general public. Yeah. Because if you have a lot of people who have this general distrust, you need to figure out why and how can you make it so that they understand what is really being said. So that's why you need to have discussion with everybody, because otherwise it makes it unequal. If not everybody has access to the same information, you're creating inequality. So good science communication breaks down the barriers of inequality.
That ties into what we were saying at the start, knowing your audience, because different audiences would require different, well, not different messages, but they would require the message to be delivered in a different way.
Yeah, different approaches.
Yeah, different approaches, because people have, well, we are dealing with people, and we have to break the view that science is science, and because when we're dealing with people, you have to be dynamic, you have to be able to change not the core message, but just how it is delivered. And I feel that's something that scientists struggle with, in terms of, because we're accustomed to like set rules, set standards, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and this is how it is. I feel like if we take that principle and apply it to other places in our lives, and probably that is not effective, because while that works for science, it doesn't work with communicating with people, because in any one audience you could have 3 to 4 different people with different backgrounds and have had different experiences with, let's say, example, a vaccine, or even with a virus, so I think I want to talk about how could we see a way forward in terms of bridging the gap. And I think one of the major things that needs to be done in terms of bridging the gap is knowing your audience and taking time to know your audience, because I feel like if that's like 85% of the work there, if you spend time to know your audience, you could really give a message that is accessible to them. It's like going to speak, if you're a lecturer, but you have to teach a 10-year-old probably a theory, photosynthesis. You're not going to give them the same material that you would give somebody in a lecture. You're going to break it down, you're going to change it, you're going to use different words, you're going to use diagrams, you change it up. So I think we need to start to, I'm saying we, like, I'm actually delivering it, but like generally scientists should. Yes, I am. Yeah, so I feel like if we need to bring some of that, well, at least even consider that when having to go deliver science to people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that also actually kind of ties in with what Anna was saying earlier, is that not all scientists could be communicators, because I think as people who have been in academia, like all of us have been studying for basically our entire lives, right? At that point. So at this point currently. And then as we get older, we kind of get that more specialized information. And sometimes we say things like, I might say something to my mother that I think is like common knowledge. Like some people might not know that all vaccines are not 100% effective, right? This is something that I had to explain recently, that not all vaccines are 100% effective. So when you had like the efficacy percentages coming out for the Pfizer, the Moderna vaccine and so on, people were like, no, they're not taking that because it's only 90%, it's only 95, why instance is 100? And we know that no vaccine is ever 100% effective. The highest we have is 98, which I believe is the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, but I'm not too sure about that. So we kind of take the knowledge that we have and expect everybody else to have the same thing. And we don't really know, we don't really recognize that not everybody, what might seem very simple to us, would not be the same for everybody else.
Yeah, I agree. It's about breaking down the terms to other people, because we're accustomed, we've been in the field for how many years, but they weren't in the field, so they don't understand. And like the vaccine, my family as well asked me, well, how come they were able to create a vaccine so fast within a short time frame? And I had to explain that not all vaccines, you don't start scratch from all vaccines. Like they can have vaccines that were previously being created for other diseases that they realized I would have worked on this particular virus, and that's what they built upon. So it's things like that. Like I realized that nobody would really understand because they're not exposed to it every day.
So again, this comes back to the whole point we were talking about right in the beginning about scientific elitism and how this kind of destructures scientific elitism. And Tevin was talking about, I think this is a really interesting point you touched on about how, we kind of apply the scientific process to the scientific communication, and that's not helpful or constructive at all. That is the problem. You need to figure out how to decentralize information and how to, as you said, know your audience and communicate it to the right people. Not everybody would be able to read a paper at all. That's the first thing. First of all, you have to realize not even everybody is literate, but everybody needs to have the information. So there's multiple ways of media, of like just sending out or disseminating that same message that you need to do. And because we have this kind of preconceived notion that it has to be, again, like you said, we apply the scientific method to scientific communication. We have a preconceived notion of what science should look like, when that's not necessarily true. On YouTube, Wyatt does this great series. It's called, I think, In 5 Levels of Difficulty. So they have like physicists and biologists and quantum computing specialists explain different concepts, very high level concepts, in 5 levels of difficulty, starting, I think it's from child, go all the way up to expert. So that, I think, is a very great series because it shows that you can get the same message across. Not everybody needs to understand it at the same level, but if you can understand the core concepts, that's great. And I think that might be also just another problem with, again, the same thing that how not all scientists are teachers. They can't explain all those core concepts. They only understand it at the highest level, but they don't understand the fundamentals behind it, which is something that people just won't like to admit. But if you can't really explain it to a child, then you don't really know what you're talking about in the first place. So it's important to just know your audience and be able to speak to everybody. It doesn't have to be text. It can be an Instagram post, a YouTube video, a poster, something, but it's about disseminating the message in the right way so that everybody can have access to the information.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree, Darren, with what you're saying, especially when you're talking about the different levels and some people only understand it at the highest possible level and not being able to break it down, because like going to school, like we use something like photosynthesis. They will teach you one thing in primary school, and then when you reach a secondary school, they're like, well, I know you learned this, but this is not exactly true. And then they add something to it, or they change the way they bring across the message. And then you'll do that, and then you'll go to university, Form 6, and they'll be like, yeah, I know this is what they taught you in lower school, but no, this is what actually happens. And to me, I remember this distinctly because I felt like if all the previous levels were just lying to me. Like, why didn't just tell me from the start? But at that time, I guess I didn't appreciate the fact that I would not have been able to like understand that concept without getting these different tidbits of different information, or the information packaged in a different way. And so what you're saying is very correct. We have to learn to like package the information for different stages of understanding and backgrounds. And so yeah, that's just me. That's just me agreeing with your point. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because for me, it was the same when I was in chemistry, and all these new orbitals coming in, and every level I go, it just contradicts the thing before. It's like you come in to talk to somebody about S and D orbitals, but they don't even know what an atom looks like in the first place. That's why you have to know what you're talking about, because you become and saying something to them, and they're like, but hold up, that's not what I learned. That's completely contradictory. That's why it's important to have the dialogue and realize what is the level of understanding that the person you're speaking to has, and where do you start from? And that's why you have to look through the 5 levels and see where do you have to target, where do you have to hit, and where are you on that scale as well is also important to know, because you don't want to overestimate your knowledge as well. It's important to know what you know and not try to aim above.
Exactly.
Then you're just spouting disinformation and misinformation as well. Exactly, I agree.
Also, something Tevin said, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember my point that I wanted to make, because we've been mostly talking about misinformation at this point and like how we could kind of combat that and so on. But then there's like the issue of disinformation, where it's people who intentionally spread the wrong information, and then they come wrong and strong that they know everything. And that's usually the first sign for me that they know nothing at all, because when you talk to like experts in their fields, they will tell you, I don't know, but this is the most likely explanation, because like we don't really know everything for sure. It's kind of impossible for us to know. So even if you talk to, like, anytime you talk to someone and they're like, well, this is it, this is what they say, this is what I say, this is what the truth is, that's usually a sign for me to like stop listening to them, because then you know they don't know much basically.
Right.
So yeah.
But yeah, they can like twist things or emphasize things, like when they're saying mercury is in the flu vaccine, but it's just such a small percentage that it's basically nothing at all. And that's the thing, they emphasize the point that mercury is in. So it's not that they're lying totally, but they're twisting the truth in a way, and that's what they do all the time. Like anything that's released, they use it to their advantage.
Yeah. But the thing is about that with the mercury and the flu vaccine, it wasn't even the like the toxic one, because there's methyl mercury and ethyl mercury. I can't remember which one is the toxic one, but it's the non-toxic one that's actually in the vaccine.
Yeah, and the thing is, there would be people who would see it and be like, you go research, like, I don't know what this is, let me go research it. But there would be people who would see that and be like, I'm gonna send this to my mom, I'm gonna send this to my dad,
you know,
gonna send it to my daughter.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is bad for your body.
My mother sent it to me, and I was like, why are you sending this to me? You know this is not true. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. So
I think actually a very important thing to say on that point is like, fact checking is something that before you send anything, fact check it. Just like check it. You can do that, and I think it's very easy. Like, with the internet, anything is possible. Just Google it. Like before you send something, just Google it to see if what you're sending is true. If it's disinformation or misinformation, it will come up as you will flag it. Or if they're linking a paper or a journal, just look it up, read the abstract if you can. Just try and figure out, is this what I'm saying actually true? Like, what am I sending? Because you don't want to just be spreading the wrong message. Just make sure that you're informing people of something real. And I think the onus is on you if you're going to be sharing that kind of information.
But I feel like the issue with that too is that when they do research it, the articles that pop up is whatever media releases, because it's the most popular that would come up on Google. And it's not like they're gonna search like in Google Scholar for research articles, because they may not know how to do that. And then they may see a research article and be like, whoa, I don't know those terms, I can't read that. So they're gonna read a media release and say, okay, well, this confirms it, and they're gonna continue to share it. So that's another issue too.
Well, could we talk about that for a second then? Actually, like how you would go about fact checking, and how would you actually know what are the right resources to check, and what are the actual journals instead of just mass media stuff?
I would say a lot of like articles released by media, although they say certain things, they have to pull points from articles itself, and usually they attach their sources. So sometimes when you click on their source and you actually read the paper, then you actually get to see the full information, and it's not just the snippet that they took to put in their paper. So that's a thing too, like they can check out the sources to see if it's legit or not, because you should always have good sources to back you.
In agreement with Anna there, when checking the sources, also research who the writer is. So like see what are their credentials. Are they an expert in this? Are they, who are they? Who are they working for? What is this entity? So if you see an article on a page, find out about who runs this page. That's something that I do, because sometimes it's easy to make a web page. Anybody could probably do it, and anybody could write a blog and post the information on there. I mean, Wikipedia has a big problem. People go and change entire Wikipedia pages. So what I like to do is like get to know the author and see what are their, if they're credible, if they're reliable, that sort of stuff, in tandem with following their sources and reading their sources for yourself.
Fact checking thing as well was that an easy thing to do to check the reference is, instead of just Googling it generally, because that will usually give you the mass media references, go on scholar.google.com. So Google Scholar, and it will give you directly the scientific journal articles that have come out from there. And as Anna said, once people write something in a mass media report, even they have to reference the paper or the journal or the article that they use. So check that and just go and see what is there. I guess the problem is that not every journal or article is actually accessible to the general public. And this is kind of where the accessibility to science and inequality plays in again, because to some extent, as a general member of the public, you have to take the word of the mass media, because you have no way of actually fact checking yourself. And so this was actually one of the big issues that came up with the vaccine. There was a lot of information that's hidden behind paywalls and just inaccessible even to scientists. So to some extent, even scientists couldn't necessarily fact check some of the things that were being said of the vaccine. And we also had to kind of take some things as gospel. Only now is research starting to trickle out. But this is also one of the things that it's quite a conundrum for the researchers in this position to do, because when you have intellectual property, like a vaccine, you don't necessarily want to publish these things, because once you do, it means that people can replicate your research and also profit off of it. So there's always a conundrum between, do you publish or do you protect your intellectual property? And this is a very difficult dilemma in the scientific realm. And this might be a whole next conversation, but I just think there needs to be a bit more protection for intellectual property in science to make it more accessible to the general public in the first place, because I think that is actually where one of the largest barriers to communication.
And I have a point to that in terms of the site Sci-Hub. Like this site was brought about to make scientific papers more accessible, because a lot of them, like you said, are hidden behind paywalls, and scientific publishing and articles are controlled by like 3 major companies. So there's basically a monopoly. Well, not a monopoly because it's 3 companies, but there's a tight hole based on by a few companies. And the creator of Sci-Hub, which is like a free site that gives us access to scientific papers. The owner of that site, the person who makes that site, is right now being bombarded with a lot of legal action. She has to hide. She has to hide her identity because there are a lot of people looking for her because she's making a lot of the scientific papers now free. And while I guess she is breaking the law, the thing is why would we want to have scientific information that should be for everyone and should be easily accessible, because the point of science is to share information with everyone. Why are we having it hidden behind paywalls or being like exclusive or selective in ways being shared? Which I think is kind of the point you were alluding to, Darrian. And yeah, so it's very scientific papers is very inaccessible to the average person, and and that is one of the problems that we face with scientific communication. People can go and just research things and research it for themselves due to the fact that a lot of the papers are hidden in paywalls.
Yeah, exactly. We need scientific Robin Hoods and Edward Snowden to break us out and educate the general public. But it's quite sad because, I mean, the thing is, scientists truthfully don't really make lots of money. So the way that they do make their money is from these research papers and stuff which they need to sell to get money. And so this is, again, where the dilemma kind of is at its worst, because of course we want research to be free. The scientists don't want to have it behind a paywall as well, because they prefer if everybody could read their research. But economically, they just can't afford to do that because you spend so much time and money doing this research. So it's like giving it away for free. You're not getting any return. So as a scientist, how do you actually proceed? Nobody wants to charge for their research. I can say that as a scientist. Nobody wants to do that. But you have no other choice. You still need to eat. The scientists need to get fed too, right? We need to make a living. So how do you actually go forward? And this is why it's important to have scientific funding. So when you have these funding bodies, you can make science free and accessible. But that's the issue. And like Trinidad, for example, and the Caribbean on a whole, we don't have many funding bodies. So when we publish, we have to make it behind these paywalls. And this is why we have quite a low scientific literacy, I would say, in comparison to a few other countries where the science dissemination is way more accessible to the general public. So it's about, at the end of the day, how much is the country itself or the government value this scientific information and this research that is being done, because that is how you would be able to educate the public on what is being done in your country. Like the reason about why we're doing this is to try and give you guys the idea about what we do and what science is going on in the Caribbean and the region. But we're not being funded. We're doing this because we like it. It's a hobby for us, right? But hobbies don't pay the bills at the end of the day. So while everybody could do this, they just can't, unfortunately.
I would just like to say we're not being funded yet. Speaking into existence, we're gonna get
just putting it into existence.
Any sponsors, hit us up. We're all available.
Have your people call our people.
Yeah, our people will be us.
Yeah, we are our own people.
Yeah, but very good point. So we're at this place where scientists need funding, but the only way they could get funding is through the system of paywalls, and that is a very daunting place to be. And hopefully, no research I've done has really opened up any things in where the system is changing. But I believe there is a few selective group of people who are trying to make papers more accessible, and hopefully that also means that scientists would be paid out of that, making it more accessible.
Yeah,
I can't confirm
that. The sad thing that not a lot of funding goes into research. So, like, that's all scientists can do, like charge you for their research. But I don't know, I think it's sad. And the only time they actually do fund is like in a pandemic when you need a vaccine. So now everybody is getting money to try to develop one. But it's just, I don't know. I hope they learn from this so that more scientists are funded for their research. Hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just trying to booty call us for research.
Yeah. When we need
to that 1 a.m. text, AOB to have COVID.
Funding.
But did you all mention that scientists don't get paid for to publish their papers from the publishers?
No.
Okay, so for anybody listening, if you ever trying to do a late night assignment and you're trying to pull an all-nighter and you find the
Email
paper,
the scientist.
but the paper, no, well, I wouldn't say email the scientist the night before because they might reply 2 weeks after, if ever they reply. But if you start your assignment a good bit in advance and their paper, whatever paper you're trying to access is behind a paywall, you could probably email the scientists and they will more than likely send it to you for free. Because a lot of the times when you see these paywalls that are set up by publishers, the scientists don't make any money from that. How the process works is that we, as a scientist, pay the publisher to publish our work and then get nothing from it. Literally, that's how it works.
Exposure.
That's really messed up.
Yeah. So it's just
so you will get exposure and scientific people who look into scientists, yeah.
Well, we might get citations, but the thing is we don't even get exposure if it's behind a paywall. Because realistically, if you have a lot of students who, because most of the time that's who might be using our papers in their projects or whatever, you wouldn't get the exposure behind a paywall because no student is going to be paying to clear that
unless the institution is sponsoring.
Yeah, through the library or something.
Oh yeah, but they always have outdated research articles. I never got recent ones.
So Sci-Hub is the flick.
It was a blessing, and
it's still working, but the person is basically fearful for her life. She can't. She's which is sad.
Yeah.
The thing is, right? It's so competitive. You need to know about things that are going on at the moment because you don't want to be doing something that somebody's already done last year. You have to make sure, and especially with my PhD, I have to be reading things that are coming out at the moment because I need to make sure that I'm staying competitive. But that's also kind of a dilemma as well, right? When you have access to such broad information and makes a bit drowning, you have to figure out what's the right thing, what should you be reading, and also how do you stay on top of it? How do you identify yourself, make yourself individual from all that's going on? Because right now there's a lot going on. Bring us home.
Okay, bye.
Bring us home. No. We have to be thank you for listening to our conversation. We hope that it was informative. We hope that you understood everything that was said. If you have any questions, hit us up at aegisofscience on Instagram.
Necessary links we will put in the description below.
In the description. Okay, so thank you for listening to Seriously Science. All right.
Thanks, guys, and see you again soon.
Yeah,
bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.